Joining us now, Ron Hosko, a former FBI assistant director and CBS News security analyst. Ron, less than 24 hours since this explosion, what are investigators looking at right now?
They're going to be looking for pre-event reconnaissance. What steps did the suicide bomber take to look at this venue, to plan out what he was going to do, to look at the network around him and see who else saw, sensed something, detected something, who was he communicating with and perhaps coordinating with, so that they have a sense that there's not a follow-on attack by a Confederate, that there's not somebody else out there who was within the bounds of Great Britain or outside of the country, coaching him, guiding him, leading him, inspiring him to this horrific crime.
And to that point, Ron, we know that ISIS is claiming responsibility, but how can U.S. intelligence go about figuring out, was this attacker inspired or directed and supported by an actual cell?
Well, hopefully the law enforcement and the intelligence effort is not impacted negatively by encryption. They will be looking for all of that. Of course, the U.S. keeps close ties with the Brits. Among our closest ties, the FBI legal attaché and his assistants in Great Britain will be talking closely with the intelligence services, seeing if there are any connections here domestically, and trying to learn what we can so that we can raise our guard here domestically as well.
Officials believe, Ron, that this attacker was a lone suicide bomber. We now know that he's traveled by subway to the ticket area. How do you piece together the tick-tock of exactly what happened leading up to the attack in this type of investigation?
Well, if you think back to the Boston Marathon bombing, that's precisely what law enforcement did there. Really going to the seat of the blast, looking at video, looking at the physical evidence, and working backwards. Looking at the way the two bombers in Boston came into the scene and where they went back to, searching apartments, residences, other connected spaces, talking to the network, and certainly looking at the electronic flow of information to see what inspired, what motivated, and what drove the timetable. Was this a target of opportunity? Was this something that this suicide bomber had been thinking about for a period of time? And what did they draw inspiration from? They'll be peeling back layers on all of that, and of course sharing with intelligence partners so we can all get better.
Ron, we're hearing that he had used an improvised explosive device. Witnesses saying that they saw nuts and bolts as shrapnel in the area of the explosion. What does the sophistication, or really lack thereof, say about this attacker?
So that is going to be, I think, very telling to understand the chemical makeup of this device. It is common terror practice, widely known, to put shrapnel into a device or next to it so it can scatter and do the greatest harm possible. But I think the type of explosive used, the type of timing or trigger mechanism for the device is going to be very telling about the sophistication, and then tracking that back to the sources of that inspiration. You know that terrorists, really going back to Al-Qaeda with Inspire magazine, and now the ISIS mirrors of Inspire that are online propaganda tools, contain robust information about how to commit acts of terror, and that includes building explosive devices. So making those connections will be very important for the investigators.
You know, Ron, the thing that's so hard to stomach here, this is one of the largest indoor arenas in Europe. How do you protect a venue like this, especially going into the summer season? So many parents are having their children attend concerts this summer. What precautions can anybody take? You know,
that is the million-dollar question right now. I just got here after talking to Jeff Pegues, your correspondent over at the Verizon Center. And 2 weeks ago, I was at a hockey championship, a playoff game, where you're talking about 18,000 fans being funneled through maybe a dozen doorways to go through security. And there's this pressing risk that's right out in the street where hundreds of fans are lined up, myself among them, in the queue waiting to get through security. So if you're a determined attacker in that situation, you have essentially a 100% chance, if you've evaded prior detection by law enforcement, you have pretty much a 100% chance of walking up to a crowd of 400 people waiting to get into security. The million-dollar question is, how do I push that security perimeter back and not have a choke point that is just a block further behind? And that's a vulnerability as well. So much of this is pre-event detection by law enforcement, the great work that the FBI does on a regular basis, and men and women in law enforcement seeing something and saying something as a member of the public, notifying the police about something that's problematic.
All right, Ron Hosko, thank you so much for your insight.
My pleasure.